We're live.
We're live. Okay. Do you need the mic?
We'd like to have it, yeah, that'd be good.
It just helps them. Okay.
I'll run around.
This is for the benefit of the recording. If you want to shut off while you're asking a question, then let us know. Okay.
Hi. I have a question about publicity surveillance and how it's impacted your life. So when this became known to you that you were being investigated and government was looking into your life, how did you feel? How did it change your behavior? Like your phone suddenly becomes like a contamination to everyone around you. So how did you deal with that? You stopped using your phone? How did your friends around you change their behavior? Like, how is it to live under this,
It's not pleasant. It's not pleasant to live under a surveillance state. I mean, did you hear me okay? Okay. It's not pleasant living in a surveillance state, and I'll just give you kind of, during the course of their investigation, before I was actually charged in secret and indicted in public, they had extensive surveillance on me. That meant I was being watched at work. In fact, I actually launched a major investigation. It was a counterintelligence investigation at NSA. The results of that are sealed in the court records. That's how serious they were internally. They used to park one or two cars at the end of my road, and the FBI agents later told me, he says, we knew everywhere you went. We knew when you left home, we knew what vehicles you were in, we knew where you stopped, we knew when you came back. I mean, and then electronic surveillance was extraordinary.
But did friends start talking to you?
No, because during the course of that, see, no one knew until I was raided that there was anything going on. I didn't tell anybody. I mean, I knew I was under surveillance, I was under investigation as early, I didn't say it earlier in the talk, but as early as the spring of 2006. That's when but I had predicted that I would come under surveillance and under investigation after the Rise of Linkbot article was published. It changes your life. I'll be the first to tell you, because you've got the government using every instrument that's available, and of course I was well aware of what instruments NSA was using, because they were basically penetrated the fabric of society, and increasingly so, and it had become highly normalized. So having you basically become a target, a direct person of interest, and they want to know everything there is about you. It was really interesting when they actually came into my house. So they breached that. They had a warrant, right? I would argue it was the wrong court, but because it was supposed to be for foreign intelligence, right? So they had to go to secret court, and then they went to an Article 3 court. But they had a warrant. Magistrate judge signed off on it. It was like a 10-day warrant. They were at the very end of that period in which they could actually execute it. I have like a 4,000 volume library in my living room, and I'm a rather eclectic reader on a vast range of subjects. It's just who I am and my background. And it was clear that they had a couple of agents who were going through every single book in that library, which I later found out is they were looking for hidden compartments, they were looking for marked up book. They actually took a number of my spy books, as I say, like James Ryden's State of War. They took all the Jane Bamford books, including his latest ones that had been released at that point in time, and several other books that I had in my office, my office where I was a professor. Ironically enough, I was teaching a course on the secret side of U.S. history, from George Washington to the present day. And my last, I probably should have mentioned it, I'll say it here so you get the benefit of it now. My last official act as a senior executive at NSA, I'm teaching this elective, secret side of U.S. history. We did a field trip to where? The International Spy Museum in Washington, D.C. And it was funny because when we came in, it was one of the curators. It was a special thing. He takes us kind of behind the scenes, behind the exhibits, and says a lot more than the public tour. They had a little thing about NSA, and they actually had the date wrong in which it was founded. It was created by President Truman. And I actually wrote out one of those suggestion forms, and I guess technically that was my last official act. Right? So they're in my living room, they're looking at all these books, and all the lead agent, all he said was, he said, you have a very, very interesting library, Mr. Drake. I found out later from people who've worked in this business that they're profiling me, they're doing their best, I understand, to try to put me into a box. And they have profilers, they're full-time profilers, and apparently they were having great difficulty figuring out even my political leanings or inclinations just based on the range of books in there. But they got to know everything there was to know about me. When you say the lives of others, I became a life in which they wanted to know everything they could know. I used to get these weird, like random inspections more frequently than others. I'd come up to one of the NSA gates, the main complex at Fort Meade, Maryland, and it seemed like after I was put under surveillance, and they were tipped off, that's clear, because obviously they knew my car, they knew the license plate. I mean, I had a senior executive parking spot. There's a certainty to that, there's a regularity to that. And I get pulled over, but what they would do, they'd pull me over kind of in the median, and they would have the hood up and the lift gate. I was driving a Prius, they'd have the lift gate up. And they would like extend the period of looking at my car, like it was all like slowed down. But this is a main gate. There's people I work with, colleagues and others, coming in, seeing me, and I knew that it was more than random, but I couldn't tell anybody. So I live with the reality that things could get a lot worse later. And later it took several years. So it's not a pleasant. It really changes your life. And what the worst part of it is there's what I think kind of the secondary and tertiary effects, what they call second and third order effects. Because now your entire life is shattered, your entire social network, your social structures. I was very involved with my son, who was 12 when the FBI came to he was in middle school. I was very involved with him in Boy Scouts. He'd been in Boy Scouts since he was a Tiger Cub, and he became an Eagle Scout this past spring. I was very involved in the Boy Scouts as an adult leader. Went to many of their excursions, hikes, and all that. All that changed. All that was changed. I had colleagues who I was now presented abroad. I was radioactive because they would even some of them would admit they would say, "Well, even to be seen with you endangers me. To be seen with you, I jeopardize my job." And some would physically react. It's like even those who had known me for a while, they said, "I really can't see you again. I don't want to jeopardize my job, or my clearance." See, one of the things that a condition of continued employment is you have to maintain a clearance in this system. This is the thing they ultimately hold over you to give you access to the secrets, to grant you access to the working spaces. You have to hold the clearance, and it's a trust-based clearance. And if they decide they don't trust you anymore, guess what? And it doesn't. They can just administrative reasons say we don't trust you. So it turned my life inside out. There are silver linings, but the entire set of people, all those networks, I had been within that system for a number of years in various capacities, even as a contractor for a number of years. All of that was forever altered. Yeah, I mean, and the personal costs, I don't talk about it much because it's deeply personal, but I was separated for a long time. I was headed for divorce. I had family members, including my father, who was a World War II veteran, who really struggled with what had happened to his son. And it took a couple of trips to San Antonio where he's retired, and he's now in his 90s, his early 90s. I took a couple of trips to help, and I think he still struggles. But it took many hours with him face to face to walk through, like, why did they come after you? He just couldn't fathom. Because he knew he had served in the military himself. He was a World War II veteran. I mean, it's like, and so I had family and I had friends. Friends find out they're not really friends. You find out that they consider you did something bad. You made us look bad. Whistleblower. It's extraordinary lonely. I mean, it's a voice of one. And you don't wake up one day and say, I'm going to blow the whistle. You don't. I was just confronted by the stark reality of what I shared with you earlier. But I couldn't tell anybody. I could not tell my spouse. Part of this was to maintain deniability because my spouse was interrogated after the raid in 2007. That was extremely unpleasant. There's other things I can't talk about that happened to my family as a result of merely their association with me. Extremely unpleasant. The government went to great lengths to destroy not just me personally, but to render, is wherever possible, all the social ties that I had within the community and with family and friends and former coworkers. I remember one person, there was only 2 people that still remain in any regular, was irregular contact, have any contact with me on any basis. Extremely steadfast, extremely supportive, but all behind the scenes, because they still work within that community. But I remember they actually organized a lunch. We typically went out. We used to do all kinds of things. I led many teams at NSA, and one of the things you do is you would have these social events. And some of them were working, some of them were just to have fun together as a team. And we had lunch. And several of them were, you could tell their body language. They were just like this. They were like, I want to give you this.
Yeah, so let me just briefly flip it around and say, what would you say people can do in their interaction with whistleblowers or people in your position that would help you the most?
It's understanding. It's really understanding. I mean, it comes down to, remember, I made a conscious decision. I was convicted by the truth of what I was exposed to, and I wasn't going to remain silent. And so part of this is that decision as opposed to, and I was willing to sacrifice my career. And I realized I've talked to Daniel Ellsberg at great length about this. You do your best to have those who know you understand why you did what you did, recognizing that it may not be sufficient, and you may lose people along the way. He actually thought a lot more people would come forward because of what he did. It turned out only a couple of close associates supported him. All the rest remained silent. And ironically enough, he doesn't talk about it because even there's one period of his ordeal, he actually went through this system. He actually was blowing the whistle through channels, but no one would do anything with it. He did, ultimately, Mike Gravel read 4,000 pages in the Pentagon Papers in the well of the Senate until it just collapsed, right, out of sheer exhaustion. Because in the well of the Senate, you can actually do that. Essentially, it's one of the interesting things is given a senator, you have immunity. Now, they may kick you off committees and all that, but they can't take away your senatorship just because you basically can say anything, short of calling for insurrection, right? But Ellsberg said it's extremely lonely. He said the one period of his life he doesn't talk about, and it's very difficult for me, although for me it's cathartic to talk about it. It actually helps me to talk about the deepest part of this ordeal, which is very, very personal, how far they went to destroy my life. He still will not write about the 2 years he actually went to trial before it was tossed out because of prosecutor misconduct. We would talk about it, write about it. That it still hurts, or I say hurts, 4 years later. It is also true, I have to say it, I realize I'm in a rather unique position because I was able to hold off the government. That is not the case with the vast majority of whistleblowers. They usually end up in prison, or they end up severely harmed by the government. Win Ho Lei, for example, because I had one of his lead attorney, who was intimately familiar with what's called the Classified Information Procedures Act, which governed the process when the hearings were non-public. We actually sealed the courtroom in many, many hearings over many, many months. Win Ho Lei said, I'll write a book, you'll never hear from me again. It'll be literally the gone fishing sign. And that's true. No one, he was actually incarcerated. The judge actually ended up apologizing to him on behalf of the American public because he was wrongly framed, as it turned out. He did get a settlement. Some people ask if I have no settlement. I mean, the cost alone to me is approaching $1 million in lost income and debt, and a lot of other loans. But what price do you put on freedom? But I have a voice, so the costs are extraordinarily high. They really are, and most don't. And I recognize there's very few people that can stand up under the withering assault of the government because they have so much available to them, especially in today's day. Did I give you a sense? I mean, it's it's deeply personal. I mean, next door neighbors there was rumors about what the raid was all about. I mean, my son had to live with. In fact, they had to protect him at school because the raid itself was on the news, for the next day. Like, what the heck happened? Because they had network television. The big boom antenna trucks were out parked on the main street watching the FBI agents going in and out of my house. So, It has an effect. You know, you got adults. I remember adults are kind of whispering on the side. You know, he's that guy. So.
I just want to thank you for being so candid. It's really kind of raw to speak and know that any one of us who does speak up against government action potentially be in that situation. So thank you for being so loud about it.
Make the truth.
I know it sounds truly extensive. So I'm a crisis member, so we map during emergencies and satellite imagery. And what's interesting about that is that we've had a debate in our community about to what extent we will map. And part of that debate goes from this. And so satellite imagery is either given by people like Digital Flow, or the US government, or the UN, depending on who it is. So just for context, so if you're not familiar with that world. The reason I bring this topic up is that we had a huge debate within our community about when we should use satellite imagery in times of conflict or crisis, if it's in Congo, if it's in Syria. Should volunteers get involved in that? So how do we use the internet for good? And so we have all these people out there who have no or some digital security skills, whose work might be used by the government for them because they think they're trying to help people who are refugees. So there's these ethics around what does it mean to use the internet for good, and there's these thoughts around drones and satellite imagery that we're running into, and I don't think that we're hitting the general public discussion of it, because people are like, oh, that's nice and lofty, if you can volunteer on the satellite imagery in Syria. Good on you. But the concept of people using their brains in emergencies is a lot different from the concept of people using satellite imagery to surveil people who might be a whistleblower.
I will say it this way, it's a different value system. The value of enhancing well-being of people, quality of life, versus simply keeping track of people. And the amount of energy and money that's being spent by both Canada's security services and on a far greater level by the United States is extraordinary. I've said on a very cynical level, follow the money. That's the value system. See where the government prioritizes its resources, which are ultimately money coming from the citizens. See where it goes, because that's the value system. And if that's the value system that you want to keep, then hey, then you deserve the government you get and get to keep. I reject that, because I've had an interesting, one of the silver linings in my own case is all these other networks of people looking to use technology for actual social well-being and for quality of life. I mean, imagine the amount of money, just for example, that was spent on the Iraq war alone, a war that never should have happened. Never should have happened. Just imagine that money alone. You want to read a book about it? We Meant Well, Peter Van Buren, another fellow whistleblower. We Meant Well. Because he was actually part of the provisional, the response teams, the PRTs. He's going out in the hinterlands with these projects that are supposed to be doing good. They actually weren't. They were designed for another purpose, right? It was to give the illusion that we were actually there to quote unquote, we weren't. So it's important, because it's one of the trappings of empire. I'm speaking as an American. It's one of the trappings of empire is you end up extracting. Your purpose is not to leave behind a legacy that benefits others, and yet we have history. I mean, look what happened after World War II. I get all these conversations. I just came back from Europe, and they're just sitting. I was at lunch, and they're saying, "What's happened to you, America?" They actually asked in that way. You were supposed to be, the example, with all even your own faults and contradictions of how to set the course to improve the world around us, and what have you turned into? I mean, it actually said, "What have you turned into?" So. Those are fundamental questions, but those are value-based questions. And it's what values do you want to keep? And that's a societal question that has to be answered, not just individually, but by us as a community.
We have a question from one of our short viewers.
Yeah. We've had quite a bit of engagement online today with the talk. One of our alumnus wanted to say thanks for such a powerful, riveting talk. The question we have is that it's from @netcombatant, and he wonders whether you see a shift in society where all information is out in the open, thus creating more accountability.
You know, there is the cypherpunk, which I certainly ascribe to from the golden era of computing from the 1980s, which is really where it was kind of born and began to live. This idea that information wants to be free. And by sharing information, it actually makes us better human beings. Because we're not hoarding it, we're sharing it. And by sharing it, we actually amplify the effect with each other, especially when it's intentional for a purpose to improve our lot in life, as it were, in terms of human condition. And there may be a corollary question. If an answer to that is, are there secrets worth keeping? You know, I used to work in the system. Are there secrets worth keeping? Yeah, there probably is to this, but a very, very narrow set. And that narrow set you probably don't want to have the algorithms, specific technology to make a nuclear bomb just stuck out on a website somewhere. Although it takes an awful lot of technology to make a nuclear weapon. There's probably certain diplomatic, secrets in terms of certain conversations that take place. On the other hand, I have to say, because of what I went through, I even question in many respects the things that have been even traditionally protected. Because I have to ask the next question, what purpose is it serving to keep that information secret? And for me, the information you keep secret is the information you choose to keep secret as a sovereign individual. That's why I ran that privacy exercise. The government in this case, they want all the information, but they don't want to share what they're doing with it in most cases, except it's national security, right? So you have this paradox of power, which is they want to control it. And so if you want to control information, if that's a currency in the digital age, but I could argue information has always been power. You go back in history, information is fundamentally how do you know about others? How do you know about the world? You send out explorers, you send out scouts, you send out people. Star Trek, which is more the idealistic, used to go where no one has been before, right? It's the continuing mission, right? To seek out new life. It's kind of the Gene Roddenberry philosophy. Again, it comes back to the value. But the information, unfortunately, in control systems, those systems that want to constrain, those systems that want to hoard, the information truly is power, and they want to restrict it. So when they own it, this is why I consider internet's become this huge surveillance platform the world has never seen the likes of. By controlling that and the accesses and all that, you get to control who gets what and where and when, and you also get to see what people are sharing at the same time. It raises the hard questions about the use of information. I subscribe increasingly to networks, instead of networks of control and networks of authority, really networks of cooperation. And networks of cooperation, because those are trust-based, and so you actually incentivize trust as opposed to distrust. Networks of control, where you're constraining information, it's distrust by definition. And see, ironically enough, if it's distrust, I have to hoard the information if I don't trust you.
Thank you. I'm interested in your thoughts on how the activities that you've undertaken and the Snowden disclosures and other people that are releasing data, how you think this, going forward, will affect the behavior of the way NSA and their intelligence partners operate.
I can tell you, we used to call NSA Big Daddy. We never called NSA Big Brother. This is back in the Cold War. I can tell you it's been unprecedented for NSA to have themselves publicized in this way. It's unprecedented in their own history. They've been essentially the Cleveland lights now for 6 months. And then they know there's a lot more to come. But they're counterattacking. And one of the things, I've said this before, as I experienced myself, if you challenge authority, I'll channel Frederick Douglass. Power doesn't yield willingly. It won't. It's not going to give up what it's taking. It's not going to, especially if it was without the consent of the government. especially secret power. It's not going to give itself up. And so they're going to continue to do their darndest to protect themselves. And I mention this because if you follow the course, and I realize I have insider knowledge, if you follow the course of the authorities that NSA will invoke as to why they do what they do, it's very interesting. Just in the last 6 months, where they can no longer hide behind an authority that was given to them in secret. It could be Enabling Act legislation, it could be a secret interpretation, it might have been a secret opinion of the secret court. They'll acknowledge up to the level of the disclosure, but no more. And what they then do is they invoke the next defense. That's the ring moats around the castle, right? Or the mound, the mounds, the moats don't have to have water in them. It can actually be defense of positions that surround the core of their mission. You're now starting to see the defense is, well, we had all the Enabling Act, but we no longer can hide behind like Section 215 or Section 702, all this legal stuff that most people sort of glaze over. Well, more recently, they've been invoking executive order authority, and in particular 12333. Well, 12333 was actually an order, not technically law in the constitutional sense. It's an order signed by the president for the executive branch. It was signed by Reagan. Well, it was the deal with national security, and that's now they're wheeling this out. If all else fails in terms of not under that program, which is a euphemism, not under that program in terms of the authority, or we're not doing it under this program, that means there's another program, which really means there's a different authority. What you're now increasingly hearing is the Executive Order 12333. What's beyond that? Well, I didn't say it directly here, but I did say that the government changed itself in the Constitution. One of the things people don't realize is there are national emergency powers that the executive branch holds. Some people call it continuity of government. Some people call it COOP, continuity of operations, right? Those are all euphemisms about what do you do in national crises where you need special authority. Now, separate from that, which I argue actually was done virtually within this country, and we've operated essentially with that regime since 9/11 in particular, they can cite existing statutes or existing orders to protect themselves until further disclosures breach those authorities. So it's just a pattern to note over the last 6 months. I don't know if there's anything else in there that you wanted to ask about, but I find it's an interesting way to examine, because ultimately, this is what I would hear. I stood up because in part, one of the things in the military, there's a thing in the Uniform Code of Military Justice called Article 92. The number doesn't mean much, but if you're a service member in the United States military, you only have to obey lawful orders. And part of that came out of the Nuremberg trials. Just because you say, I'm following the order, didn't give you, and you couldn't hide behind the order. And in fact, you were obligated to ensure that it was a lawful, and you could question the order, even if it was lawful, to ensure its lawfulness. That's fundamental to the system of justice. So the pernicious side of power is you start invoking these special authorities, and somehow that gives you the cover or the color of. You have to remember what I was present to. 12 years before Snowden, they had bypassed all law, period. There was no authority other than, I'm the president, I have executive position unfettered, no one knows about it, he's going to do it.
And just before I hand over the mic, I don't have a great Star Trek quote, but I wanted to say that, evil is when good people do nothing, and I just wanted you to thank you for doing something.
So it's clearly very difficult to be a whistleblower. It seems like you have to be perfect or they'll get you somehow. And maybe even if you're perfect, they'll get you. But can you give guidelines to whistleblowers who are contemplating?
Yes, this is actually kind of links in with your earlier thing. Many potential or actual whistleblowers who may not be public yet I've met a lot of people. I've met a lot of attorneys, Human Rights International, those representing whistleblowers in the United States, including my own attorney, who represents five NSA whistleblowers and 2 CIA whistleblowers. One, you've got to know the environment you're in right now, which is extremely dangerous to blow the whistle, period, especially in the national security space, because there really is no protection to speak of. There's this massive cutout for if you're tied to national security as an employee in government. Even the more recent, the Enhancement Act, the whistleblower, the WTA, we call it in the United States, has this huge cutout for national security. I mean, it doesn't apply. The act that I invoked when I blew the whistle within the system over a number of years, both before individuals in government as well as committees, was the Intelligence Community Whistleblower Protection Act in 1998. The problem is, if they retaliate against you for blowing the whistle, you have no cause of action, as they say legally. So I don't have any resource in a court of law. I just don't. In essence, you end up being exposed by virtue of your action. You're assuming trust within the system to protect you. Now, there is certain aspects that means you can ask or seek redress in terms of retaliation, right? So if they retaliate against you, they're not supposed to reprisal. They're not supposed to do that if you were a whistleblower working within the system. That didn't work in my case at all. It just didn't. In fact, I now tell people, and this is Edward Snowden clearly got this, to work within the system would be exposed almost immediately, given the sensitivity of the information, even within the system. So what I tell whistleblowers, one, lawyer up, really good, and be well aware that you may lose not just your career, but depending on what you're blowing the whistle on, you may come under additional investigation, maybe up to and including prosecution. It's unfortunately become too much of the go-to threat by Obama to do that. So. And also, there's a number of organizations that support whistleblowing. Advocates, the Government Accountability Project is the one that I'm tied to, but there's others across not just the United States, but even in Canada.
Are they generally competent?
Most are, some more so than others, depending on their particular field. The ones that are in the DC area are quite competent, but some of them don't have real lawyers. It's part of the problem. They're advocacy groups. They do media outreach. They do panels. They highlight. They do lobbying to Congress. The problem is in this space, you also have to deal with the legal side as well, and the court of public opinion. And that's why most people don't. But here's an interesting side effect. There's been a significant increase in the number of people who are coming forward and have not been made public yet. People are coming forward as a result of the Edward Snowden stuff.
We have time for one last question.
Oh, okay.
So I'm wondering what your thoughts are about dismantling the surveillance apparatus. And the information disclosures are one way to try to push back against it. But there are other levers that can be used, including money, and the flood away from US tech companies may be something. International pressure and Angela Merkel's outrage means that. But I'm wondering what you think is effective, knowing the people that maintain this apparatus. What do you think is effective in actually scaling it back?
I think it's multifaceted, but ultimately money talks, and the economics here, the reality, when you got American companies, in many cases they've been cooperating with the US government. In some cases we still, although I'm well aware of some of these agreements that have yet to be disclosed, some that I blew inside, saying these arrangements with companies like Cisco, for example. Cisco themselves have actually stated publicly they're already losing business. They're losing out in bids in terms of information technology infrastructure overseas. Why? Because they're too closely, or is perceived, they're too closely affiliated or aligned with the United States government. When that begins to have a direct impact on the bottom line and business goes elsewhere, well, it's one of the interesting dynamics, and I'll just speak to the United States. People start maybe our associate with the government is not good for business, because that's a bottom line thing, and they want to stay in business. So you kind of have this reverse incentive. The other one is clearly the working within the legislative system, and then the other is obviously the public. And I've called for maximum exposure and disclosure. I had always hoped that someone would stand on my shoulders, and after it turned out that it was Edward Snowden. So.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Thank you all for coming, and thanks especially to Greg, and Joseph, who have efforts under less than ideal